A few months ago, Marvel Studios released the first season of Loki. I didn't have very high expectations for it, since I hadn't been a big fan of most of the MCU offerings since Endgame. I didn't like Far From Home, WandaVision was good until they pretty much revealed they had no idea what they were doing by the end, Falcon and Winter Soldier was fine, and I didn't even bother to see Black Widow. But I watched Loki anyway, and was blown away by how fresh and creative it felt. It proved to me that the MCU could still surprise me, and it seemed to pave the way for the future of the franchise. Spoilers for the end of Loki Season 1, but the way they wrapped it up only made me more excited. A multiverse of possibilities had just opened up, and they could now do pretty much anything they wanted. I also knew the next Disney Plus Marvel show they were working on was What If, a show I had been excited for since the day they first announced it. This is it, I thought. This is where they really kick things into gear and show us the stories they're capable of telling beyond the Infinity Saga. And now, having watched the show, I can safely say that I can't remember the last time I've been this let down by something I was this excited for. Before talking about the show, I want to give a quick little rundown of the comics. What If is an anthology series, with each issue asking a different question and showing a different alternate version of the Marvel Universe, ranging from what if this pivotal moment in this character's life happened completely differently to what if this guy punched this other guy. The stories are all introduced and narrated by the Watcher, a cosmic entity whose job it is to simply observe every Earth throughout the multiverse. Owen Likes Comics has a good video about what makes What If so great, so I'll try to keep this brief. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I'm some massive fan of the What If comics. I like them, don't get me wrong, but I'm a much bigger fan of their concept and what they represent. Each issue is an opportunity for Marvel's artists and writers to take these beloved characters and throw them into a sandbox, free from the confines or consequences of continuity. Since each issue comes with the assumption that we will never see these versions of the characters again, it allows them to go as big as they want, experimenting with tone and putting these characters through the ringer to see how they react outside their usual environment. And that creative spirit simply isn't there in the What If show. I guess my first sign that this series wouldn't be very ambitious should have been the animation. It's not bad. Some parts look stiff and there are some genuinely great looking moments, but for the most part it settles for just being serviceable. A show like this could have really benefited from going bigger and crazier with the visuals. Imagine if every episode had a different animation style to make each one distinct from the last. Also, I feel like for the characters, they stick too closely to the MCU designs. I mean, okay, maybe that's a dumb thing to point out since this show is based on the MCU, but hear me out on this. The Marvel movies take costumes and designs that were made for comic books, a medium in which outrageous and over-the-top costumes are the norm because it's all done in stylized drawings, and translates them into a live-action format and makes them look like they could plausibly exist in real life and be things people would wear. Sometimes I think they overcompensate, but I digress. But What If takes these live-action costumes and translates them back into a more stylized medium with little to no change, making them just look off in a way I can't fully put my finger on. In fact, I'd say sticking too close to the groundwork laid out by the movies is the cause of What If's downfall in every aspect. Let's start with the voice cast real quick. Most of the actors from the movies return to reprise their roles here, which is cool, but it makes the characters they couldn't get back all the more distracting. Josh Keaton actually does an incredible Chris Evans impression. I actually didn't even know it wasn't him until the end credits, but Lake Bell sounds nothing like Scarlett Johansson to a distracting degree. That's just a minor thing though, and ultimately I guess it's kind of cool to have most of the movie actors here. What I really want to talk about is the tone. Like I mentioned earlier, the What If comics were a great place for Marvel's creatives to really experiment. The stories could be goofy, they could be heavy, they could be scary, they could be thrilling, and everything in between. But the Marvel movies, especially lately, tend to have one of two tones. Funny, or serious, but with a plethora of unfunny jokes piled on top to apologize for the seriousness. And What If is no exception to this. In fact, it might be one of the worst offenders I've ever seen. Some of you might be expecting me to harp on the Party Thor episode for this, but honestly I don't mind that one nearly as much as I expected to. Like I mentioned earlier, the What If comics could get goofy sometimes too, and that was totally fine. Party Thor is completely built on being a comedy, and even though I didn't really find it all that funny, I wasn't bothered by it since it had a goal and style that it stuck to throughout. No, I'm more bothered by an episode like What If Earth Lost Its Mightiest Heroes? This one has a lot more problems than just tone. It's a really poorly written mystery in general, but let's just focus on the tone right now. Like, what the fuck? Hulk's girlfriend had to figure out that Black Widow didn't kill Iron Man because she noticed that none of the serum left the syringe? Nobody else at S.H.I.E.L.D. noticed that? No. The tone. We're just talking about the tone. By all accounts, this should be a dark and somber episode. We're seeing all these characters that we've come to know as the world's greatest heroes killed off one by one in a sudden, unceremonious way. As Black Widow is being hauled away to prison for a crime she didn't commit. Joke.
Maybe we should get some tunes going. Lighten the mood.
As Thor has just been murdered and Hawkeye is the prime suspect despite him also being innocent. Joke.
Wow. Even while rotting, he smells like lavender.
And the villain, hold on, that's another thing. We don't even learn the villain's motivation until he gives his grand speech at the end, and this is the first time the audience is learning most of this information. There was absolutely no point at which we could have possibly solved the murders before the episode gave us the answer. That's just a badly written mystery. Anyway, as Hank Pym's grand revenge plan, the last thing on Earth he has to live for, is falling apart before his eyes by something he could never have predicted, what does he do? He tells a joke.
What's with the goth kid?
It's like this episode is fighting the very idea of the audience getting invested. Like it has so little confidence in itself that it has to keep throwing in jokes lest we accidentally view it as something the writer cared about making. However, I think this problem is most prevalent in my least favorite episode of the entire season, Zombies. Again, just like the last one, all signs point to this episode being the darkest and most horrific of the entire series. Pretty much everyone is dead, the survivors are up against pretty hopeless odds, you know, zombie stuff. But no, for whatever reason, they leaned heavily into comedy for this one. And maybe that could have worked if they had adopted a sort of gallows humor approach, like if they turned this into a dark horror comedy. At least that would have been a fitting direction and made it stand out from the rest of the Marvel Studios offerings. But no, it's the exact same style of Marvel humor, TM, I've grown to know and loathe over the years, and it doesn't fit with the tone of the episode in any way. Let's take a look at a few scenes. What is Happy Hogan's reaction to being skewered through the shoulder by a hook fired by zombie Hawkeye and then dragged to his undoubtedly horrific and painful death? He shouts blam over and over like a child. Not even a single note of fear in his voice whatsoever. What is Wasp's reaction to violently murdering her friend who just turned into a zombie? She makes a little jokey joke.
Guys, I'm covered in Sharon.
The kid has hand sanitizer.
I wanted to rip my ears off every time Paul Rudd spoke.
I know what you're thinking. I've lost weight. Thank you for noticing. But don't worry, I'm not gonna let it go to my head. I tend to process traumatic events with dad jokes. What I wouldn't give to get chewed out by that old grump one last time. I did it again. Zombie pun. Whoa, watch out! She's a man-eater! There it is! I'm doing it again!
And when they started showing Spider-Man's zombie apocalypse survival video, I actually said out loud to myself, oh no. The humor doesn't feel in any way like something the writer thought would be a natural addition to their story. It feels like a studio executive looking over the script, panicking because it's not on brand enough, and then severely overcompensating. But again, humor is not Zombies' only problem. It also seems allergic to interesting ideas. I'm not very familiar with the Marvel Zombies comics, but what I have read has a lot of fun and interesting ideas. These zombies are intelligent, capable of complex thought, and able to speak in complete sentences, and I don't think I need to tell you the creative potential of superpowered zombies. And that is a creative potential that this episode barely chooses to capitalize on. The episode starts by showing us the zombified Iron Man and Doctor Strange, and for a second I got excited. Two incredibly intelligent people, one wearing a superpowered suit of armor and the other with exceptional magical ability. Surely they'll do something cool with that, but no, they're taken out almost immediately, and most of the other superhero zombies we see don't have much in the way of powers. Hawkeye shooting the hook into Happy's shoulder earlier is pretty much the most interesting thing he does. For God's sake, the episode ends by showing us zombie Thanos and they don't do anything with it. I mean, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, it becomes really stupid. In this timeline, Thanos should have had 4 Infinity Stones by the time he arrived on Earth, and you're telling me he still got bit by the zombies? But still, it would have been cool to see him do something. Now, there is one redeeming quality of the Zombies episode, and that's everything they do with Vision and Scarlet Witch. The idea of Vision luring people to their deaths with a promise of safety in order to feed his wife is super twisted and creepy, and they actually make pretty good use of zombie Scarlet Witch's powers. It's just a shame that this is only a brief part of the episode, is over far too soon, and is constantly interrupted by Paul Rudd making the least funny jokes I've ever seen in my life.
Wingardium Leviosa! Shut up!
Before we continue, I just want to tell you guys about this video sponsor, me! My 2 ongoing comic series, Dark Phantom and Wonder Boy, are available to read for free on Webtoon. If you want to see the birth of a new superhero comic book universe featuring incredible art from Miki Ramirez and Tristan Dunman, check them out in the description below. Alright, back to the video. All this brings me to my biggest problem with What If. It wastes nearly every ounce of creative potential it could have had. Most episodes don't stray very far from the stories of the movies. In fact, some of the time it seems actively trying to copy them. What if Killmonger rescued Tony Stark? He would more or less do the same thing he did in Black Panther, but now Tony Stark is involved. There isn't really a story in that one. It kind of just goes until it reaches 30 minutes and then sort of stops. What if Captain Carter became the first Avenger? Basically the same thing that happened in the first Captain America movie. In fact, that episode feels like it's constantly trying to justify its own existence, like it knows it's basically the same plot as First Avenger, so it goes out of its way to awkwardly point out all the things it does differently.
It could be worse. Flynn could stick you on one of those USO tours. Wear a crazy costume, being told to smile 10 times a day.
Something about this smells as fresh as 3-day-old fish.
Or maybe you're just afraid of trains.
Like, oh, a squid comes out of the Tesseract this time. That makes it different. I think back to how much I liked Loki, in no small part due to how much creativity was on display in that show. They introduced the multiverse concept by showing us so many wildly different versions of one character. I mean, they even had an alligator Loki. So in the lead up to What If, I was expected to see how many more creative versions of these characters there would be, but instead I was given some of the most boring and tepid premises they could have thought of. And when I got to the last episodes, I saw why. They were building up to a big team up where our heroes have to stop a big villain who wants to use the Infinity Stones to destroy the universe. Again, I'm reminded of how Loki set up in the first episode that the Infinity Stones were powerless in the TVA, signifying to the audience that the Infinity Saga was over and they were going to move on to something fresh and new. But then What If immediately did a 180 and returned us to the safe familiarity of a story we've already seen before. And the thing is, I'm not entirely against seeing these characters come back. Hell, it's not like the comics have never revisited a What If scenario before. But these characters are so bland and uninspired that I had absolutely no interest in seeing them meet each other, and the threat they're up against isn't any more interesting. The team up even has a character from an episode that I assume had to go unmade due to COVID, and she feels just as underdeveloped as the characters we got to spend full episodes with. Okay, that's not entirely fair. There are 2 episodes from this season that I honestly enjoy and show a flicker of hope for the future of the show. First is the second episode, What If T'Challa Became a Star-Lord? Sure, it still has a lot of very unfunny and irritating jokes, but it also capitalizes on a central premise of What If, taking a character, putting them in a completely new environment, and seeing how they react. It doesn't feel like it's just retreading the beats of Guardians of the Galaxy but with Chadwick Boseman in the place of Chris Pratt. It tells a fun and completely original story. The other episode I liked was What If Doctor Strange Lost His Heart Instead of His Hands? Clunky title and comically long montage of Rachel McAdams dying over and over again aside, this is another episode that makes far better use of the What If premise than the other ones. One change to his story set Doctor Strange on a completely different path while still feeling fully in character for him. I also like the idea of the Library of Cagliostro. It feels like a place that's existed in the MCU this entire time, but we just haven't seen until now. It's great world building. The animation is also top-notch. The way the magical creatures are rendered is genuinely gorgeous. But my favorite part of this episode is the ending. Most of these episodes feel afraid to have bad endings. Even the ones with darker premises like the murder mystery and zombies have to add a glimmer of hope right before the credits roll, but not this one. The writers simply let the events play their course, and the consequences of Doctor Strange's actions catch up with him as his entire universe dies around him. I would call this ending perfect if they hadn't pulled out this Doctor Strange to be part of the big team up at the end, and while not ruining the ending of his solo episode, certainly dampens it. It all just reeks of Disney executives being so afraid of potentially alienating even the smallest fraction of the billions of fans they made over the years that they restrained what should have been their most wild and experimental project yet. Sometimes I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, being the only person who's been very vocal about how much I hate What If, but even the people who like it don't seem all that enthusiastic about it. Disney has perfected good enough into a science. What they make doesn't have to be great, but as long as it floats slightly above mediocre, nobody's going to criticize it. All I have to say is, if What If is representative of what's next for the MCU, then I am not excited at all for what the future has in store. Also watch Star Wars Visions. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, consider subscribing and telling me what you think of What If in the comments below. You could have seen this video 24 hours early for just $1 on Patreon. Follow me on Twitter at ClassActJack for updates, and of course check out my comics. Links to everything are in the description. I'll see you guys later.